So when talking about citations and plagiarism, the first thing we should know is when to cite sources. And so essentially, in a nutshell, it's anytime you reference information that did not come from your own brain. So if you're writing a paper and you want to reference someone else's words or ideas or thoughts, you always have to cite that. So here are some examples: books, journals, presentations, social media posts, movies, art, interviews, magazines, even video games, lectures, so online and in-person lectures, podcasts, YouTube videos, etc. So anything that you did not come up with in your own head, something that's not your own original thought, that needs to be cited. All right, the next slide, please. Another important question to ask is, why do we cite sources? So one reason why we cite sources is to give the original writer the credit for what they have done. And this is, on the surface level, it's common courtesy. It's showing respect for someone else's ideas. I'm sure if you came up with an original thought, you wouldn't want someone else to steal that thought, right? You wouldn't want them to repeat that thought and then try to pass it off as their own original thought. So just it's a show of respect and giving credit to the writer, the original writer. Using citations also makes your argument more credible, since it'll show that you're citing credible sources. So if you're writing a paper, if you've done a lot of great research, you've pulled from a lot of different journals, you've taken articles, etc. When you show citations in your paper or your article, that will indicate to the reader that, hey, you did your research, and they'll look through the sources and see that they are credible sources, and so that'll make you look more credible and trustworthy. And then lastly, it can help people in your field do research for their future projects. So I also think of this as like a fun tip for us as writers as well. When we look through articles, you can get stuck in the research rabbit hole and keep clicking on other people's citations to keep looking for more in-depth information about specific topics referenced, things like that. So you can help people do research by showing citations as well. All right, next slide. So one of the most common citation styles that we use in college and after college in the professional world is APA. And this is commonly used in the social sciences, so think psychology, sociology, etc. So first, I want to give a brief overview of in-text citations. Keyword brief, this is very brief. It is a very broad overview. So later in the presentation, I'll give you some ideas if you would like to look up outside resources that give more comprehensive guides to creating citations. But just as a broad overview, when citing within the text, that means you're, if you're writing your paper and you reference a quote or you reference an idea, then you'll put the citation, or you'll put a citation in that paper. So in that sentence or in that paragraph. If you're using a direct quote from the text, APA requires the author's last name, the date, which is the year, and then the page number or a page range. So there's an example there. In parentheses, we see the author's last names. So there were two authors, Aaron and Greer, comma, the date, the year 2019, comma, page 113. And then you close the parentheses. So that was for a direct quote. Now, if you're summarizing or paraphrasing from the text, in APA, you include the author's last name and the year, but you don't have to include the page number. So oftentimes when you're summarizing or paraphrasing, you might be referencing an idea that's repeated in several different places in the text. Or maybe if you're summarizing, you're discussing the whole text. So page numbers are not needed here. So the example, it's very similar, but it's just parentheses, author last name Aaron and Greer, comma, 2019, and then close the parentheses. All right, the next slide, please. And so now here's just a brief overview of the reference page in APA. So the reference page is the page that goes at the very end of the document and lists out the full citations in alphabetical order. So anytime you cited something in the paper, you used the in-text citation that we talked about in the previous slide. Then at the end of the document, you'll have a reference page that shows the full citation, all of the citations in a list. And the entries in your reference page will vary depending on the type of source you use. So a citation for a book does not use the exact same formatting as the citation for an electronic source, like an article or an ebook. And, you know, we talked about the different types of sources like movies, podcasts, lectures, etc. So they will vary depending on what source you use. So for example, let's look at a reference for a journal article, which is probably the most common source that we use in college and in professional writing. So that would look like last name, comma, first initials, then you put a period, and then you put the year in parentheses, another period, then the title of the article, a period, and then in italics, you will put the title of the periodical, which is kind of like the journal name, comma, and then put the volume number, and then directly after that in parentheses and not italicized, you will put the issue number. After the parentheses, you'll insert a comma and then put the page numbers, and then you put a period. And then if there's a DOI available, you'll put that at the very end. And the DOI is just a type of link to that article. So there's an example. The last name of the author is Granger. The first initial is H. The year was 2020. The title is Using Magic in Quarantine. The title of the periodical is The Wizard Journal, comma, volume 8, issue number 1, and then the pages were 115 to 120. And so this is just a fun little example for a journal article. And when you look at articles on a database, usually all that information is easily accessible. All right, so next slide, we're going to talk about MLA now, which is another one of the more common citation styles. So again, let's first talk about the in-text citations. So when you use a direct quote or a summary or a paraphrase, MLA requires that you include the author's last name and page number. So with APA, the in-text citation for a direct quote was a little bit different from the citation for a summary or paraphrase, but in MLA, it's consistent whether you're directly quoting or summarizing or paraphrasing. So it would just be, for example, Granger 115. So it's page 115, Granger is the last name. If you don't have the author's last name available, that does happen where sometimes articles don't include an author's name. You still need a citation. You can't just use the page number because the reader won't know what exactly you're referencing. So what you can do is use the title of the article or the title or the name of the organization. So for example, if you're using a website page, you can use the title of the page if there's no author name. So let's say that the name of the article was Exploring Magic. So you can put that in parentheses instead of the author that's not there. And then again, if there are instances where, you know, maybe you can't find the author's name and you can't find an article title, or you can't find this piece of information, that piece of information. There are resources out there and different guidebooks that can help you, that will help answer your questions on how to make a citation if you can't find a specific piece of information. All right, in the next slide, we're going to go over the Works Cited page. So again, that's the page that goes at the very end of the document to list out the full citations. So as with APA, MLA entries will vary depending on the type of source you use. So book entries are different from article entries, which are different from movie entries, etc. So a book entry might look like this. So it's the last name, comma, first name. The name is spelled out. And then period, then the book title in italics, period, and then the publisher, comma, the date, and then put a period. So example, Granger, comma, Hermione. So unlike APA, the first name is actually spelled out in its entirety. And then there's a period. Wizards in Quarantine is the book title in italics, period. And then the publisher is Magic Books, comma, the date published was 2020, period. All right, so that's just a brief overview of MLA. So next slide. So this is something that comes up a lot, and oftentimes students don't know what exactly to do when the text that they're reading, let's say that you're reading an article and the writer of that article quotes another writer in the text. And if you want to use that quote, that is called an indirect source. So it was a source cited within another source. So if you're reading an article written by Granger and she quotes Timok, something Timok said, you'll have to clarify to your reader within the citation that Timok said the quote, but Granger cited it in her text. So in MLA, it could look something like this. Timok stated that UTD students are strong enough to overcome any challenge. And then after the quotation marks, your in-text citation will say, quoted in Granger 115. So the MLA citation, the normal in-text citation would be the author's last name and the page number. So all you do is add to the beginning of that quoted in, or QTD period in, and then author's last name, page number. And in APA, it might look like Timok stated that UTD students are strong enough to overcome any challenge. The in-text citation will say, as cited in Granger 2020, page 115. So again, the structure is the same. It's the author's last name, the date, and then the page number, but you add the phrase as cited in to the beginning of that citation for APA. And so that's just I feel like this is a really good sentence structure to use if you ever indirectly quote another source. So use the original writer's name in the sentence and then use the article writer in the in-text citation. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so here are some things that you can use in your citations or in your quotes when you cite other sources. So you can use ellipses, which are the 3 dots, the ... to leave out information that is not important to your argument. So if there's a really long sentence or a set of sentences that you don't want to paraphrase them, let's say you just want to directly quote the author's words, but you don't want to use the entirety of the sentence or the set of sentences because it's just too long, you can use ellipses. So example, the author argues, once you have used ellipses in your paper, you will understand why it helps with readability. So those ellipses in the middle of the sentence indicate that there were more words in that sentence, but they weren't important. And the sentence that we have here makes perfect sense as it is right now. So this is a good tool to use so that you don't end up having 4 lines of direct quote, because that's often unnecessary. All right, next slide. Another tool you can use is brackets. So brackets can be used to add or change information within a direct quote. So for example, they, then in brackets can often help with clarifying details. TMOC 2020. So I often see brackets used to change pronouns. So sometimes a writer may use a first person pronoun, so I, but maybe when you're writing an essay, you don't want to use first person, so you can change the I to a third person pronoun instead in brackets. You can also change tense or verb form. So let's say you want to make a verb into past tense, or you want to change a past tense verb into present tense. You can use brackets to do that. All right, next slide. And then here's the slide I was talking about. If you need help citing sources, you can. There are a lot of credible online resources that you can reference. So there are guidebooks like the Little Brown Handbook or A Writer's Reference, and these are very comprehensive books that will pretty much give you guides on how to cite any type of source. Same with Purdue OWL. Purdue OWL is probably one of the most commonly used sources. So it's Purdue's online writing lab, and they include guides for MLA, APA, Chicago style, IEEE, and I think there's one more that I forgot. But they do provide, it's a really easy resource to use. You can look through the different sections and they tell you how to, cite a book, cite an article, cite a social media post, etc. And they give examples as well. You can often look at other universities' library guides. Some universities offer these guides for public use, so you can search them up and find them and use them. You can look at UTD's library, see what citation books we have online, especially as the library is still virtual right now, but you can definitely look up on our library database. Writing Center guides. So our Writing Center, the UTD Writing Center, we're currently revamping our website, so we will be adding very soon some helpful little pamphlets or posters that will that includes MLA and APA citations. But you can also look at other universities if they have public use, available for public use citation guides. You can always ask your professor. They're a good resource, or your TA. And then, of course, you can always come to the UTD Writing Center. You can set an appointment with us, and we will be happy to look at your citations and check them and then give you some helpful tips. All right, so something important to know is how to summarize and paraphrase and how to cite those, and knowing that you have to cite those. Okay, so one of the easiest ways to plagiarize is through having improper summary or paraphrase, or failing to cite summary or paraphrase. But to make sure that you're citing summary and paraphrase properly, here are some tips. So the first one is anytime you summarize or paraphrase, you still need an in-text citation, no matter which style you're writing in, APA, MLA, etc. So it's easy to use in-text citations when you use direct quotes, and it is a little bit more difficult to cite when you're summarizing or paraphrasing because it's, you don't see the quotation marks, so you might think that you don't need to cite it, but you do, because they're still another person's words, thoughts, and ideas. They're still not your own original thought. Secondly, make sure that you're rephrasing all original words and changing the sentence structure. So when you're paraphrasing, let's say you're taking a sentence, you don't want to use the whole sentence, you want to restate it in your own words, make sure that you're not just going through the sentence and looking up synonyms for each word, or for a couple words, or whatever the case may be, whether you're replacing all original words or some, you have to make sure that you change the sentence structure. And I say some words because, you know, using words like a, the, and, but, etc., those are not super original words. They're words that we all use. So just when you're rephrasing all the main words, no matter what you're changing up, you have to change the sentence structure as well. So you can switch the sentence around. Maybe if there was a comma in the sentence, you can try to flip the sentence around so that what was after the comma can now be at the beginning of the sentence, and then what was previously in the beginning of the sentence can be at the end of the sentence. Try to switch around the phrasing in that sentence. And then thirdly, pretend that you're telling a friend about the article or the section in the article. So don't look at the original while you're rewriting. So if you read an article over and you want to summarize the whole thing, or if you're looking at a specific paragraph, read it, turn the paper over, and then restate what you just read. This is a good way to make sure that you actually understand what you're referencing. So it's kind of like an accountability check, but it's also really helpful because it's less likely that you'll copy sentence structure and copy original words if you're not actually looking at the text while you're rewriting it. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So let's look at a couple examples. This first example is paraphrasing gone wrong. So it's plagiarism. It's not a good example of paraphrase at all. So let's walk through it together. So the original source says, in an effort to seek the causes of this disturbing trend, experts have pointed to a range of important potential contributors to the rise in childhood obesity that are unrelated to media. And the source was from the Henry J. Kaiser Family Foundation. The name of the source was the role of media in childhood obesity. It was published in 2004, and this quote is from the first page. So let's look below at the plagiarism, so the very poorly done paraphrase. According to the Henry J. Kaiser Family Foundation, experts have indicated a range of significant potential contributors to the rise in childhood obesity that are not linked to media. And then in parentheses, 2004. All right, so let's think about that for a moment, and then let's go to the next slide actually, and let's walk through why this is bad plagiarism. All right, so let's look. Let's look at the highlighted words here. So in the original source, the highlighted words say, experts have pointed to a range of important potential contributors to the rise in childhood obesity that are unrelated to media. Okay, so now let's look at the plagiarism paragraph and look at the highlighted words. Experts have indicated a range of significant potential contributors to the rise in childhood obesity that are not linked to media. So we can see here that the writer made an attempt to change some words. Again, most of the words there are still the same. Experts have a range of potential contributors to the rise in childhood obesity that are That's a significant amount of words that are still the same. Also, the sentence structure is still the same. You could read these side by side and match up the words, and the sentence structure has not changed at all. So even if you have two words together like experts have, you need to change it in your paraphrase. So again, this stresses the importance of completely rephrasing, completely changing the sentence structure, and replacing all the original words. And we will go through an example in the next slide of a paraphrase that has been well done. So next slide, please. So using the same source from the last slide, here is a well done paraphrase. A report by the Henry J. Kaiser Family Foundation described causes other than media for the childhood obesity crisis. And then in parentheses, 2004. So this paraphrase is good because it completely changed the sentence structure and the word choice. And then you can see it has the in-text citations for an APA style paper. So this one, essentially, it's the same idea from the original source, but the sentence sounds nothing like the original. And so it's like the writer, read that sentence from the original source, comprehended the sentence, so they understood the meaning, and then they restated it in their own words. So again, a good trick to use is to read the sentence or the paragraph or whatever it is in the article, turn that paper over or close the tab, and then try to rewrite it on your own. All right, next slide. So just as a recap of everything that we discussed. First, if what you wrote was not your original idea, you need to cite the source. So this includes summaries, paraphrases, and direct quotes. So all three definitely need to be cited. Plagiarism is often accidental, so sometimes people don't realize that they're plagiarizing. For example, if they paraphrase an idea but they don't use a citation, even if that wasn't intentional, it is still plagiarism, and plagiarism does have serious consequences. So just be super careful that you are keeping track of what information you're referencing. And while you're writing, go ahead and make those citations. I know some people prefer to write citations at the very end, and so maybe they'll write the whole paper and then add in citations afterwards. If that works for you, that's great. But sometimes our brains forget. We can't keep track of everything. So go ahead and at least if you don't want to create the citation yet, at least put a mark, maybe highlight the sentence, or add a comment to the document that says put citation later, something like that. Also, it's hard to memorize all the citation rules. It's probably impossible to memorize all the rules. It's not impossible, but it's just a lot of work that we don't need to memorize them. So use resources to help you cite your style correctly. Again, we discussed what kind of resources you can use. I like Purdue OWL because it's very comprehensive, but the website is organized in a way that it's very easy to look up, what kind of citation you're trying to look at. If it's a book citation or an article or a movie, social media post, an interview, etc. Then, just like we went over, paraphrasing is something that takes practice, especially knowing that you have to rephrase everything. rephrasing all the words and rephrasing the sentence in a way that the structure was completely changed. So if you want to practice, read some articles that you find interesting and practice paraphrasing. And then remember that trick that I mentioned, read the paper and then turn it over or minimize the tab and then write the paraphrase without looking at the original. And then compare afterwards. See if, do the sentences look similar or do they look different enough? And also, did you comprehend the info? Does your paraphrase contain the same idea as the original text? And then you can always make an appointment with the Writing Center. So our tutors, myself included, we're happy to help you check for plagiarism. So there's our website, utdallas.edu/student success. But again, if you come up with a question later, you can email us or set an appointment. So that's all I have. Thank you for attending our Avoiding Plagiarism workshop. Hopefully you come out of this with some new information or a good refresher of information that you already knew, maybe.